Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Critical Fools podcast. This is episode number 73, and this week we're reviewing I believe it was 2022 movie called Tar that's directed by Todd Field, and it had obviously a pretty famous actress as the lead, and Kate Blanchett. I'm a big fan of hers personally. And that's, I think, kind of how I stumbled across this movie. It obviously garnered a lot of hype the year it was released in 2022, and Kate Blanchett is just a well-renowned actress, and just happened to see this in her discography, which is kind of how I watched this film and chose it because I was really impressed with a lot of aspects of this movie, and I thought it would make for an interesting conversation. So, Chris, I kind of want to get your initial thoughts. What did you think of this movie?
This movie is it's good. This movie is good. I would say that this movie, has a certain structure and style, which is, one that I think is one that I enjoy personally. But
Okay.
in a more serious note, I think in terms of the structure of the film, I thought it was pretty well paced. I thought it was obviously it was pretty good performances. I think, the music actually, obviously it's about a composer, but they blended in pretty well. I would say in terms of structure, not too many complaints besides at times some of the dialogue can get very how do I use the term, like just over punchy. What I mean by over punchy is that I think they're trying to go for a character that's very like
Abrasive.
And also kind of like egotistic, narcissistic in many ways. And it shows in the dialogue, which I didn't mind. But at times, I think you could feel that it was a bit performative. So I know you want to talk about that Juilliard scene, and I think there's a lot of interesting points. The one thing I would say is that, yes, let's say the person who lost the argument had really weak arguments, but you could easily rephrase the scene to be where it's more equal footing in like their kind of arguments too. Like,
I agree.
I've been debating in my mind whether that was like intentional by the writing and directing or unintentional. And the fact that I have to think about it that way, I would say it's a slight critique, because I think, unfortunately, I don't have like the most confidence in some of our modern filmmaking, that they're not trying to be too, let's say, opinionated or political. But I still think the scene served its purpose and ties in well with the arc of the movie. Yeah, I would say those are my overall high level thoughts before I, do spoiler alert with the themes and some of the motifs and allegories. But yeah, I'm curious, what was your like high level take on just, watchability and structure and stuff like that? So
Overall, generally, I thought it was. I had a little bit of a different takeaway. It was a little slow at the beginning, and I wasn't quite sure where it was necessarily going. I don't know exactly when. Somewhere in probably the first third, it started to pick up quite a bit. Probably post that Juilliard scene, like you were speaking of, where she does a guest lecture. Because I thought that scene specifically was very interesting. Because her whole argument, which to a degree I do agree with, is that you should, great art should be separated from the like the personal choices of the characters, right? You should separate sort of the composer and the artist's character from the art that they create. And to an extent, that is, I definitely do agree. Otherwise, like, you could point to basically a lot of flaws or bad things that tons of musicians throughout history have done, right? That you could take issue with. But at the same time, her argument was kind of trying to justify herself, right? And her actions. Like, she's a genius composer, but she makes and does a lot of questionable decisions throughout the film. And I think you're not. It's interesting they chose that scene when they did, because you're not quite sure about Lydia's full character or where she's going with that. And then at the end, that you kind of get, or at least I took away with a different perspective of that scene. And I think that's definitely what they were trying to go with. Overall, I thought the acting was phenomenal in this film. What I was really impressed with was a lot of the cinematography in the shots. Some of the best shots, I thought, where I was like, wow, just looking at sort of the stunning nature, was when they were in the opera house there in Berlin. And oftentimes there was nobody. They were kind of trying to go for some musical scores, and they're looking at sheets, but then you see the backdrop of the massive opera house. Like, I just really like the way it like aesthetically looked. many times throughout the film. I really enjoy their kind of use of sound too, like her sound sensitivities, because she's like a composer. Her whole personality really revolves around music and sound. So they definitely use that as kind of a tool in some of the character development and what was kind of haunting this character as well. Overall, I really enjoyed this film, but we can talk about a lot of different things. I don't know where you wanted to jump to next on this.
I think we can stick with the Juilliard scene. I will say that the reason I like the scene, but like, you know, why I felt it was just it could have given a little bit more is that I think when these debates happen, it's often like you said, can you really just, you know,
Only
disassociate
separate.
the art from the artist? And I think where it's a little more gray areas that I think my opinion is that I think it's fine to enjoy the art as long as you're not using it as an excuse to behave a certain way. So like what I mean by that is, let's say there's I'm going to make up an artist, totally fictional, like artist X. And this may great, let's say music, your favorite type, just imagine that's the type of music. And this artist, like you enjoy, you resonated with, you know, as a person, but this person maybe, you know, he was famous for going to, you know, Burma and, you know, killing people. Now, if you're using the music as something that, you know, totally unrelated to inspire you to do your own, you know, work, your own life, be a good father, I think that's fine. I think where it gets kind of tricky, and I think this is why there's always the gray line, is that because unfortunately we do have a society of hero worship sometimes. Oh, he did this. You know what? I should, you know, I also hate all these Burmese people. We've seen how people think this way, unfortunately. And I think this is why people have these very stances sometimes on like positions, even though I think this young person was lacking this foresight and stuff. But because I think what we see here in that scene also is power dynamics. That's a powerful theme, I think, in this film, is that when Lydia is, you know, when Tara is really like in control, you sense it, right? How she talks to people, how she talks to the student, how she talks to other musicians, how like, okay, you're not there yet. Your time will come. You know, I will decide, you know? Remember how he talks about other...
She's the ultimate gatekeeper.
Yeah. Because probably she was gatekeeping as well, right? At one point. But she like, I think actually the scene that I found actually to be very enlightening into her character was actually the one that happened, I think, before, when she's doing the interview about Leonard Bernstein and like what does music mean to her. And I think like they're, you know, this particular piece, which I'm not familiar with, her interpretation versus her mentor's interpretation. And she talks about control a lot and time and how, you know, she controls time basically in, you know, when she's composing, versus let's say the Bernstein interpretation, which they recite and actually show a real clip in the end, right? The music's about what you feel and, you know, not about fancy technique, and it's about what, you know, what it resonates with you in that moment. And I think Tar, you know, her character, the movie is about her character, right, and her perspective, right? We only really see her point of view from in the films, you know, during the course of the film, which is intentional. I think it reminds me of the whole Edgar Allan Poe Telltale Heart poem. And yeah, sorry to bring it all back together. What I wanted to bring up was that her sense of control over her music, her, you know, her let's say her gift, right? Because she is a gifted musician or composer, and how it basically becomes her identity and becomes I think she starts believing her own mythology. And I think what's interesting about this film is how that gets all deconstructed, because in many ways I think what this film is strong point is that it's doing this with a fictional character. And I think the strength of doing it that way is that you can do this with your favorite athlete, your favorite musician, your favorite historical figure. That in the end, they're human too, who had faults and scars. And some of those faults and scars get obfuscated, or they get and you know, enlightened because of the, you know, the times we live in, right? Like there are people today now that are canceled that wouldn't have been canceled 40 years ago. So yeah, I guess my question to you is like, you know, one of the things they leave ambiguous, which I was curious to get your thoughts, is like, is she guilty of all the things they accused her of? Because I will say this, the other good thing about the film is that it doesn't explicitly show you that she is guilty of these accusations, but it's left to your interpretation of whether you believe she is like basically a Weinsteinian type figure, or there was a little more gray area here. So I'm just curious, like, because again, it's the strength of this film is that it does leave it to your interpretation.
It's hard to say if she, like, to what degree she was guilty, but I tend to lean into the side that she is, just because of her actions in deleting evidence, right, and trying to obfuscate. And she might have been scared, but I tend to disagree with that, because in many scenes they show that she's basically flirting, that she's promoting, that basically if it gives off the era of her arrogance, and that she feels she can do whatever she wants, regardless of her reasoning, because she's like the master composer, right? And with the Russian orchestra player, right? She promotes, she just does all these things, and you could tell like she obviously wants like a different kind of relationship with her. Now, did she cross the lines with that? Not necessarily, but you could see, based on those actions, you could see how she probably blurred the lines and went even further in the past, is my best guess. I think they did enough to basically let you imply that, yeah, she was probably on the wrong side of that.
No, I actually agree. I think why they leave it blurry is because it's inappropriate, because she's obviously the gatekeeper and the power. They can go back to power structure, but they give it, the director or the writer, I don't know who has more credit, but gives it a nuanced touch of.
We're not going to 100% go there.
Yeah, but also when these power dynamics, right? When you feel like it can work for you, like, so I think of her assistant, right? She clearly was like really intertwined with Tar, right? And basically, and also this other character we never see was also a gifted musician too. And the insinuation is that they were all, let's just say, they had a interesting, probably dynamic. I'll just say that. That was what's implied, right? But then something happened and it all fell apart, right?
Well, I think what happened with the assistant is Tar got bored with her and wanted to move on. That's the thing with like manipulators. They kind of use you, put you, or like at least I think what happened is she used her and was kind of done with her and kind of kept her around, but kept her in control, just in her back pocket. It is the kind of feeling I got watching it. And then she went on to, her latest obsession, which was, the Russian orchestra player.
Yeah, but that fits with the secretary. I meant the one that committed suicide.
Oh, the previous. Yeah.
Like it seemed like those three were in a dynamic. I mean, let's just say that it's not official, but it's implied.
Sorry, there's a lot of characters. Yeah, I know who you're talking about now. Yeah, whose family is suing.
Yeah, and that's how all this starts getting uncovered, because they want, they want justice for their deceased child. But what's implied is that when everything was rosy and everybody felt like they were going to get something out of it, because I think also the secretary thought, oh, eventually I'll be slotted in. I'll get my time in the limelight, right? And, like you said, I think your interpretation is probably fair that, like, she didn't want to give it to her because it would seem like favoritism, which seems like an excuse.
No, I don't even know about that. It's that I think she was done with her in terms of how she wanted to manipulate, and like that manipulative relationship of she wanted something probably physically from her, right? That had faded, because it seems like, look, this last person that she, even Krista, who was the musician whose family was suing Lydia, that Lydia obviously manipulated. She was probably not the first person she's done that to in her career. There's probably like a long list of that, right? And I think it's like you kind of are interested in someone, you use them, and then you cycle on to the next person. That seems to be the case of what happened. Now, obviously, there was some fallout, and Krista pissed off Lydia, and then Lydia basically blacklisted her from any major orchestra.
Right? Yep. But I mean, her also. I was just touching on like her excuse to why she didn't want to promote or give the spot to the secretary, the Francesca, right?
Exactly? Yeah.
She said basically like, oh, if I promote you, it would have seemed like favoritism. And then she was
that was just a manipulative tactic.
Yeah, she was just done with her. But the one other piece of evidence I think is that it backs your point about she has this history and like she has a fetish for, let's say, younger women, is that there is this scene that I thought at first when I first saw it, like maybe it was just misplaced. This is the scene I'm talking about, is where there's this freaking crazy admirer, like, you know, and she's talking after the, I think, show or something, how great her music is, and like she's like, "Can
There's
I
at the
text
beginning.
you?" Yeah, remember she says,
Beginning.
"Can I
Yep.
text you?" She's
Yep.
like really, actually she was really good looking. And she had like the purse, and like she's complimenting the purse, and like
Yeah.
you can see it, Francesca is like kind of like
Jealous.
perturbed. Yeah, perturbed.
She was
Because she
jealous of
probably
that, I think.
and she probably knows like her tendencies, right? That she,
Mhm.
you know, she's been around her
Well,
a
she's on
lot.
the road with her. Yeah.
Yeah. And that scene at first I thought it was just like, oh, maybe they're just, it's like a character scene. But I was able to look back and realize that I think that's another nugget the director's giving the audience of like, this is kind of like the gray area she operates in, and like, you know, likely crosses it too much, right?
Mhm.
Especially when like she said like, "Can I text you?" and she was like, "Oh yeah." I was just like, "Oh, this," you know, it got me my you know, my ears perked. They're like, "Oh, this is interesting." But yeah, I think so. Building off that, like, I guess what maybe something more for, again, your opinion. I guess, did you agree? What was your take on her interpretation of composition and music? Actually, did you agree with it? Did you disagree with it? I'm actually kind of curious. Like in the beginning, where she says it's about control and like rejuvenation and like, you know, stuff like that.
Or as opposed to the previous conductor on it's about kind of the feeling.
Yeah, and like emotion of it.
I tend to go with the the former composer, so more on feeling. And the reason I'll basically put this in the context of a totally different genre, but I think something that I saw recently, and it's interesting because like with the genre of hip hop, I always find that genre very different from a lot of other music, and I guess it's kind of similar to this orchestra because they're always trying to talk about who's the best right composer, the best orchestra. So in a way, it's a big kind of competition in a way that a lot of other genres aren't always seen in that light. And in hip hop, right, a lot of people tend to as like come up with lists or think, you know, who's the best MC, who's the best like producer makes the best beats. And a lot of times people get mad, especially people who grew up with hip hop in older eras, about how like this era of hip hop isn't as good as in years past. And it was interesting, and why I bring this up is I saw a clip of 50 Cent, totally different, but he's, you know, he's an artist and he appreciates music. And it was interesting because some people were saying, oh yeah, some people put like in our era might put him up higher. And then he's like, some of the older generations are like, his music's washed, it's not good, it doesn't compare to these previous artists. And 50 Cent is like, you can't really put right. It's really hard to objectively say something is better than the other because he talked about his specific song. He's like in the club. He's like, some of these people who might not like my music, they weren't like 21 or 22 in the club for the first time hearing my song, having that feeling of hearing it for the first time in that sort of setting, bringing up that level of nostalgia. A lot of times, right, music brings you to a certain memory or a certain time period that you sort of have a bit of nostalgia for. At least it does for me personally. And in that way, music really is about sort of feel or timing, about what sort of sounds good or what you think you should do kind of in the moment. Obviously, like Lydia is probably to some extent right in control, but I think it has more to do with sort of feeling because it does elicit sort of a primal response from people when you listen to music. I'm sure you feel the same way with certain songs. You hear it, it kind of takes you back.
Yeah, what's interesting about this specific genre, which is, let's call it, we call it classical, but they probably
Classical
call
music
it whatever. Yeah,
or
but that's our,
orchestral.
yeah. Is that like what I've noticed with this particular sphere is that, and why maybe it's even more of an ego thing sometimes, is that they often do what she was saying in the beginning. Like you take the same piece of music that was written maybe hundreds of years ago, and
You
you
give
do
it a
your own,
twist,
you give your own interpretation. So like then you start
but
debating which interpretations do you prefer. Then
but
also the original interpretation might have been totally like
but
it might have been
but hold
completely
on.
different than, yeah.
That's the same thing with hip hop then, because they all sample and get inspired by previous pieces of music and take bits of that and create something new.
Yeah, I guess there's some similarities. I guess I don't view sample like I never seen a rapper like take somebody song lyric and like reinterpret it like the words or the style.
I could probably find you some examples.
Unless it's like allowed by the artist, right? It seems like there's a lot of copyright stuff that sometimes blocks that creativity.
No, but with sampling, obviously, like you have to give credit, and they give a piece of like royalties to using like a sampled beat. Like that's obvious, and
yeah.
To an extent, if you're like using someone's song in like an orchestral sense, right, and it's a unique piece, and then you use it and then twist it slightly to your own, technically that is kind of like sampling. Because if you hadn't heard that, you might not have been inspired to make do your interpretation or remake because you wouldn't have heard the initial piece.
I think that's fair. I guess it's just hard for me.
There might be people who hear this and like want to take shots at me for saying that, but that's sort of my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I've always found it difficult to like compare genres, like completely different categories, because I feel like they have their own. There's some cross with music, obviously principles, but like I feel like they have their own, history, culture to it. Like when people try to compare rock to like, let's say hip hop, I'm always like, so classical to me has like its own little quirks versus like, but there's probably some like high level overlaps. But
hold on, I'm not saying that like it's very hard composing. I'm not trying to. They're two totally different genres. I'm not trying to conflate the two in that way. I'm just trying to tell you about some similarities of like how. Because it even seems like you're talking about ego, and why I brought up the two is these seem to be like the two areas, right? You have your composers and the orchestras, and they want to be the best, and like they rank and they always go. And like Lydia thinks she's the best, right? Yeah. And like that's her main idea is to be the top composer at the top orchestra in the world, which is why she goes to Berlin.
Yeah, on that topic,
it's kind of the same ego of a lot of the like the best MCs, right? They always wanted to, especially at the beginning, you wanted to one up everyone else and be the best in your neighborhood and then the best in the game.
Yeah. Well, I think one stark difference. I want to get back to the Tar.
Sorry, you brought me down that rabbit hole.
One I think interesting difference, which is touched upon the film, and I think one of the differences I think between maybe the big stars that we have in the last 30 years, like like I said, the great record label rappers and hip hop artists, and also let's say Taylor Swift, is that she actually and this is why I think her downfall hurts her a lot more, because I think other prominent, let's say in the modern era, other prominent artists can like have unleashed the hounds of their PR teams to defend them. But one thing I did notice with her is that she still has to, because the money in there is not the same, right? Get the donations, right? Go to the endowment funds, So in this world, as you know, it's very elitist and very prestigious. And so like when her reputation was basically, let's just say towards the end of the film, and tarnished, but this is not the point I want to bring up. I just wanted to put this before, everything falls apart, because in that world, it matters a lot, right? That's something I was glad they touched upon it, because I think like,
everything in that world.
Yeah, you could be canceled, but I've seen comedians rise from the ashes after being canceled. But in this world, it seems like you're done. Like we're not writing you checks.
I agree with you. You can get blacklisted, as Lydia had blacklisted others. It's not always on talent. Whereas, to your point, another like controversial figure in a different genre, hip hop, who's sort of made a little bit of a resurgence after some controversial moves, was as like Kanye, right? He put out like a 7-second. Did you see his commercial in the Super Bowl? Put out like a 10-second commercial of just him, like, just go to Yeezy.com, spent $7 million, and overnight he had 30 million in sales. Right? Yeah. He's his own promoter and doesn't have to rely on these donors.
Exactly.
I see your point with that.
Yeah, it's because it's something that I think it's like, obviously I know about it because like, I go to some of the, let's say, artsy things in New York here and there, and it's very dependent on like the goodwill of like the affluent who are like into the arts. And like as soon as you're not in that group and you don't have the money yourself, you're just out.
Yeah, I'm sure opera's the same way.
Yeah, opera's very similar. And so, but anyways, what I wanted to bring up is that in the interview, in the beginning of the film, the interviewer presses Tar on female composers, and I was curious what your take on her points on like.
What did she say again? I'm trying to.
She basically the quick summary of my interpretation is that what she said was like, Oh yeah, I'm just following, the couple of cliches, right? I'm just following in the footsteps, and other women have come before, but she has to backhand compliment them, right? Like, oh, she was really good, but she was only a guest
Yeah,
conductor. She was never like a full conductor like I am. I was just like, okay, like you don't
there's a
have
sleight
to,
of hand.
yeah, you don't have to keep doing that just to promote your own brand, because I think what she was trying to kind of say, and she did basically say, is that like, yeah, like there's issues in the past, but everything's fine now.
Hmm.
Um, and I realized, when I watched the whole film, I realized that maybe she's saying that because she doesn't want people to think that, oh, she's only a great composer because she's a woman. She wants to be
Yeah,
known for her own accord. So she does all this like haranguing in her mind of like trying to get that point across, but also making sure that like, yo, yeah, they were pioneers, pay her respects.
but she
But
wants to be the
yeah,
pioneer.
yeah, but they were not as, they didn't reach my levels.
But
So
no,
I found that totally fascinating. I was just like, wow, that happens today all the time. Yeah.
but yeah, that goes into her whole character of
Yeah.
her. I mean, her entire character is egotistical. I have two things that I want to bring up. I was curious. I don't know if you brought this up earlier in the conversation. I might have missed it or forgotten. But what is your feeling on what she said about music? Is it more that you of the feeling of her that you need to be control and it needs to be like timed, or you need to manipulate time, or do you think it's more of a feel, more a little free flow?
I think it depends on the context of when you're listening to music, because music has this very powerful, let's say it's a very powerful feeling force that it can invoke on people. I think when you're listening individually, or as somebody who is just a fan, you're, in the room of an orchestra, or you're listening to like, your own headset, I think it should be very much emotion, what you feel. Like you said, how does it,
Does it
what does
make
it
you
take?
resonate?
Yeah, does it resonate with you in your past, or maybe your future, or your present? But I say music's powerful because I've also seen how music can be something that is used to manipulate. It's used,
Sure.
often in, you know, political rallies, or, big demonstrations, right? There's a reason why music is universal, right? And so her point about control, I kind of understood it because as a
Did she mean
conductor,
in that way? Like, I'm curious as what you think she meant as control.
so what I meant, she meant as control, is that she obviously controls, she's big on controlling her musicians, but
Hmm.
most importantly, she's big on
Yeah,
controlling interpretation and the audience, what they should experience.
evoke and feel.
Yeah. And to me, that's dangerous because you're trying to play God, basically. You want to control how
Well,
everybody,
she
like,
does think she's like a god in that realm.
well, this is why she has a downfall. But
Yeah.
anyways, yeah. But like, I think she means like total control, because I think she's trying to hide. She tries to hide her points. This is why the writing of the film was really good. She tries to hide her points of like, oh, I'm just talking about the structure of, you know, the music score and all the orchestra. But what you see throughout the film is that she really means control over everything. Control over
Hmm.
the narrative, her legacy, her relationships, and I extrapolate that because I want to say she says it implicitly, but I'm not 100%. But I think also how you're supposed to interpret it, her legacy, her music,
Yeah.
right? I think we see this through some scenes where,
I think she just doesn't want to leave it up for debate.
exactly. I think we see some of the scenes when she's like talking about her getting the feedback over her music, and she's like, no, it should be this, it should be that. It's like I get being like wanting a certain structure and style, but my sense of her character was, I want the orchestra to do what I want, and I want the audience to experience what I expect them to experience.
Hmm.
And I think you're a bigger music fan than me. I mean, that's that's a dangerous thing to say to an audience.
Yeah, I don't know if that's fully true. You appreciate music quite a bit too.
I like pumping you up, dude. I use my own forms of manipulation. Anyways,
Yeah, I mean, you even went to go see a Brooklyn hip hop concert, so that was pretty cool.
that was cool. I wish it ended like a little bit earlier because I'm not a young man
Yeah,
anymore.
no, I got you.
I was like, this,
You got to experience the vibe.
yeah. All these young people, it's good for them. But yeah, my style is more classical now. I like that. Yeah.
Right.
I'm gonna go there.
Let's go mix with what's that European DJ you like so much from like the Netherlands? Charlotte.
But she's from Belgium.
Belgium.
Charlotte,
I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
A little more
Um,
trance.
yeah. But yeah, EDM's good. But
Sorry, we got off
anyways,
topic. But so my second question:
yeah.
what did you think of the dynamic with her wife and daughter?
Yeah. It's interesting because
It made it.
she
I thought that was a good dynamic that they brought to her character.
also interesting how they introduced it, right? Like at first you don't realize the
That's her wife.
the wife is the first chair violinist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think to answer your question, I think they kind of say it in the film where like the only non-transactional relationship she has in the film is with the daughter that they adopted.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else has been like calculated
Mm-hmm.
because even the violinist, I forgot her name already. She calls her out on it, saying like, we used to, basically make love and plot together, and it
Mm-hmm.
was so exhilarating. And now like you're basically bored of her and bored of, many others.
Right.
And so when things start unraveling, she bailed on her because it was like, it's not worth it. This is not really love anyways. This is just a relationship that was very convenient because I got to be first chair. Because when you start realizing through this film, and you see it through the other characters as well as Tar, then that's why it's hard to, I think, truly dislike. Like you could dislike her actions and say that she should be reprimanded, but like you see that all the other people are also kind of sharks too, right?
They are like, who was the person that she was trying to oust from it, and he like called her. He's like, I know
Cello,
you.
the
Yeah, I know
cello
you.
guy.
I know you manipulate. Blah blah blah. You're like terrible, and then he kind of takes it back, and he's like, dude, you're smashing your neighbor's wife. And I was just dying. I was like, yeah, they're trying to show that everyone's like super, like everyone's got skeletons in the closet.
Yeah, and they're all trying to like move up in this world
Um,
of like the fine arts, and like they will step on whoever's throat because yeah, this is thrown in Tar's face, but like, when I would have the as a let's say an audience member, I would say, okay, well, how come Tar is like, is she still the best first chair violinist, or her skills slip? Like, is she only in the position because
yeah,
she's with Tar? Like, we don't know. It's not really explored, but it's like all
that's
the
what gets weird when you start to have all of these conflicts of interest.
exactly. And so to answer your question, I thought it was an interesting dynamic into her character. It helps actually explore other parts of her character, not just solely her prowess, right? She's a parent, she's a wife, and even you see that even through those relationships, how she is slightly the same, but also slightly different in how she approaches those relationships. Especially with the daughter, I think that's what really highlights it. With that relationship, she's very like, you know, like a normal parent. Even though I will say that when she threatened the little girl, that was a bit
Oh, that
excessive.
was wild.
Yeah, when she went to the school because her daughter was saying like she was getting kind of bullied and like,
Speaking in German.
yeah. Well, no, one thing I want to ask you was the scene where she falls. So before then, there's this let's call it stray dog. I'm just curious, like, what was your take on that scene? Right, she's driving Olga, right? To
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know what you're talking about. I think it's just things that are eating away at her conscience or things that are catching up to her. I think that was the big metaphor for it. Because obviously the dog was kind of getting closer. She was getting a little panicky. I think it was, in her mind, that was just a metaphor for, because, they never found the dog. And so I think that was just in her mind a metaphor that, her actions are catching up with her. It's kind of like what I took away. It was kind of the same thing with the sensitivity getting louder to the sound of like the fridge.
the dream sequences
Yeah.
and the random girl yelling in the forest. Like,
Yep.
yeah, it was. It had very Edgar Allan Poe influences.
Mm-hmm.
I think like her guilt was just building.
Yeah, you could hear it's like hearing the what is it in like one of Poe's like the sound of the heart beating.
It's the Telltale Heart. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I wrote that a long time ago.
Yeah, one of my favorite pieces. But to nobody's surprise, I guess. But yeah, like
It's a classic.
that scene I know because when I was reading like some analysis online, a lot of people were confused. Or they had their interpretations, but it was
It's not
interesting to know that like
deep,
people
I
were
felt
just
like.
like, why is it? Because a lot of people felt like it's just like came out of nowhere, like randomly. But so I'm just curious to pick your brain on it. But
I think it was just all metaphor for like, her subconscious. I don't know. That was just my takeaway from it, because I was like, a dog chasing her. I was like, oh, that's obviously like her past catching up with her.
yeah, and then she fell pretty hard. But yeah, that was
Well, that's what
yeah. So
happens when you panic or you kind of blank out.
yeah. So yeah.
Oh, I get. Well, is there anything that you wanted to jump to next on this?
Before we reach the final stretch, because obviously this final stretch is pretty interesting. But I think we touched upon music, the critical characters. Who do you think was doing the photo in the beginning? Remember, Tara is sleeping on the plane and there's some text.
I think it's the assistant communicating back and forth with the girl who killed herself.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I was just curious.
I don't know. I could be wrong. I didn't think about it later on. I thought about it briefly, but I didn't think about it too deeply.
Yeah, I was just curious because I wasn't able to. That one is a bit harder to.
I thought so because like you knew that. Remember, Lydia kept asking her assistant, "Have you heard anything? Blah blah blah. Did you delete the emails?" And in reality, they have been communicating quite a bit.
Yeah, and the one other scene I thought was interesting because I read some interesting analysis of it. So it's the scene where Olga and Tar have their like welcome lunch. And Tar is saying how like this is a famous, restaurant, Napoleon and some other people ate here. And she says also this other woman that who led the
women's rights or something.
Women's rights party or something. And,
in Russia.
Yeah. And what was interesting is that I read one analysis of the scene where it represents how our society and our power structures are changing, where what is, basically that, if you are ascribing to, I'm only sharing this, I'm not saying I believe in it, but I just wanted to share it. If you are ascribing to cisgender, misogynistic view of history and stuff, like the tables are turning on you. Like you can't operate this way anymore. And that you need to be more open to the, let's say I'm going to say the other interpretation of history where, the woman matter as much as the men. Just want to share that because that's something that it was interesting to people read how people have different interpretations because this film is very. My interpretation is that Tar. See, I'm not as sophisticated as these great, let's just say, analysts and writers. But my interpretation is that Tar is trying to flex that. Oh, I'm taking you to this great restaurant.
Yeah, it's a manipulative tactic.
Yeah, and Olga's not impressed. And she's just like, oh, yeah, like this is cool and all, but like, because this other person was here too. But also speaks to, I think, the disconnect.
You got to also understand where it's kind of a class thing where they're coming from because you realize Olga comes from kind of humble beginnings too. And Russia,
I was gonna add like there's also a disconnect between her class and cultural background and Tar.
I don't think there is, but that gets revealed later on.
Right? But that's not
which I think happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, shown to us in the
you kind of forget your roots.
Yeah. But at the time we don't know this. That's why I don't want to tip my hand there. But at the time, my interpretation was that she's trying to flex that. I can be
absolutely
because she, like you said, it's implied that she wants this. Let's say, make her a muse. Let's just say like like that kind of relationship. Basically wants to bang her.
Yeah,
and she's doing the techniques that men do often, right? Like, let me show you this. Obviously, men like to flex on dates, right? Like, let me show you this great place and stuff. And she's trying to.
Well, a lot of Tar's personality types, you could talk about it, but she exhibits a lot of very dominant kind of quote unquote alpha male people who are like in high positions of power. She exhibits a lot of those characteristics.
Yeah,
I mean, there's obviously what is it like the big 5 personality types. She's definitely very like dominant and assertive.
Yeah, and
she wants to be in control of all the situations. So I'm sure she's taken many people that she wants to kind of control. to these same situations, knowing that they've worked in the past. But with Olga, obviously, like she's just like, I don't care. Like I don't. She doesn't come like it seems like Olga doesn't come from the traditional roots that many of the other orchestral players have come through.
Yeah.
Or from.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say on that specific topic is like it was interesting to read like more liberal. Okay, I just won't beat around the bush.
No,
More liberal, more liberal analysis around how Tar represents exactly what you said. Through a female body, the male archetype of control, power,
Personality traits is what I would say.
Personality traits, and how that the downfall represents how that world is ending and a new world is coming. Just wanted to say that. I'm sorry, I just say I wanted to share that because like it was interesting to read the spectrum of opinions, because I read opinions from like reviews from the Arkansas like newspaper, which were definitely not, that's not the take they had.
No.
And of course, you know me, I love reading my California, New York analysis, and that was like some of their.
Listen to the Daily's breakdown.
They didn't have one, I think. If they did, I didn't listen to it, but I did read some like I think it was like the Atlantic or the New Yorker.
I'm sure the Nation.
And so it was interesting reading the other sides too, and like I think that's credit to the movie actually, that different types of groups had. There was some overlap, obviously, with like I said, some of that we discussed already, but it was interesting to see some big differentiators when it came to some of the, let's say, hot takes. So I just wanted to bring that forward because I just thought it was curious. But anyways, I think what's important now to discuss maybe in the final stretch is actually the final stretch of the film, which actually I think is one of the stronger parts. So, you know, as we see Lydia's downfall, right? So obviously cliches, but you know, the donors back away. She has no friends. Her wife and you know is taking the kid away. She's reduced to basically what she was before she had all this.
Well, she has nothing. And
yeah,
what did you think of the scene where she storms the stage?
Oh, I mean,
whew, that one I was like, oh, I kind of looked away from it. I was like, this is just too much. Someone who just couldn't fully accept that reality. It was a good scene, but it was
that's what it was. That's what it was. It was somebody grasping for their last straw, right? Like, you know, it was like because obviously they pushed her out, right? They're like, "You're done here. You're not going to be." And her whole ego and her whole legacy, everything was the orchestra was being a conductor, and when that was taken away, crumbled. She felt completely lost. Yeah. And that was probably when we say rock bottom, that's probably the rock bottom for the character. But yeah, very powerful scene. Yeah, it makes you uncomfortable because like even though I was never rooting for her,
seeing people's full demise.
It's like it's like this is the full like this is the end of the road. There is no coming back.
No.
Like the heights that she achieved before could never be reclaimed, you know?
Right.
It just reminds me of like why people like, even though, you know, my favorite show, you know, Succession, when spoiler alert, you know, one of the characters, he basically everything slips out of his fingers. And people, you know, universally dislike this character, but people really felt like almost at the end, like almost some compassion because like, you know, it's such a hard downfall that like, you know, that you know that it'll be a scar that he'll carry for him the rest of his life. And I think with Tar, it's very similar. That like this is something that you don't really move on from in many ways. Right. You know, you try, and you know, we'll talk about how she's trying, but like in the end, like it can't ever be removed from you. And that's how life is, right? You accumulate scars as you go through life, right?
Sure.
But yeah, that was a powerful scene. But yes, as you said, she's reduced to nothing. The book deal, you know, oh yeah, I forgot about the stupid book deal. The book deal also becomes like, you know, irrelevant for her. They're like, you gotta do. Oh, that's a typical like celebrity cliche. We gotta do a reset on your image. I've heard that so many times in my life.
I'm sure they touched upon that in BoJack a bunch.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. You reset your
my favorite when BoJack was when they sent him to rehab in the celebrity rehab.
Yeah. It's like a joke.
Rehab, it's like a spa and they just pamper them.
Yeah, but then after that they reset their image. So yeah. But yes, we it is revealed that her real name is Linda Tarr. But Linda Tarr.
From Staten Island.
Yeah, with actually an extra R.
Mm-hmm.
And
no accent mark.
No accent mark. Yeah. Actually, there is a class element to this film that I guess we could discuss further. But let me just finish the point that, and she comes home and like, the brother's like, yeah, mom said, you'd be coming back for a bit, and this is the scene I was referring to earlier, where like she goes to her whole childhood home in Staten Island, and she sees all her old music. Like I guess she used to watch like a lot of the live New York orchestra
on VHS.
Yeah, so she plays that, and then we hear actually real footage of Bernstein's opinion of music and his take, and she starts crying, and I think it does resonate with her because like now she's reduced to the girl that she was. Yeah, the girl that she was, right? The girl that was probably into music and just wanted to play music, right? Before it became a power
for the love of music.
Yeah, it's kind of like what you hear a lot with sports, right? Like, it was. I hear the quote all the time. It was fun when I didn't think about the money and the pressure, right? Then it became something else, right?
It got corrupted.
And so she's reduced to that, and
then she hears the footsteps of her brother.
Yeah. So what's interesting is
so interesting.
Yeah, I like especially the dialogue there, right? Like he's not even that inquisitive. He's just like, yeah, it's none of my business. But like, yeah, I was told that you'd be beat back here, and
Linda,
and like,
that line was so. It said so much. It was so little.
Yeah, and then like he's making little side jokes, not side jokes, but he's taking little jabs, like, or should I call you like Lydia, like, or whatever.
Or no, what do you say? Whatever you go by now.
Yeah, whatever you go by now. Yeah, I was just like, damn, dude. And then, yeah, because in the end, the mythology is destroyed, right? Her whole mythology, her own mythology is destroyed for herself, even. So, so I thought that was it was a very interesting twist in the end of like
that was great. I love that twist a lot. But yeah, I think that happens to so many people. They just forget where they come from, and they think they're better than like where they grew up. Like, I mean, this is not unique, and you hear it, but to see it played out in that way was just so good.
Yes, I agree, and I think you also see it with people who, and what I
people who make it out of their small town and they go to Paris, or whatever, in fashion industry or whatever, and just totally forget about where. And
actually, this goes back to class and how maybe the high arts are blocked for many people, because it is true that like if you want to like go down this route, let's say you want your kid to do this, like become a great pianist or something, that's a lot of money on your part,
and very few make it.
Yeah, very few make it. It's a lot of money for your part, getting him to the right tutors, the right schooling, and then that career is not exactly like plush with cash if you're at the bottom, right? If you're part of like the North, I don't know, Virginia orchestra, like that pay is gonna be less than being part of the Berlin,
San Francisco or New York.
Exactly, right. And like you said, it's a very select. There's one first violinist in those. Like, it's not like there's like 10 of them
in each one, and there's like 20 in the world.
And so like it's
unless you want to go play in the Philippines.
And it's also because it's become a, let's say, a delicacy of the wealthy. I'm going to say ultra wealthy because they're the ones that are having to write these big checks. You see that like it's become like, fine wine, fine restaurants, so like you said, like if you're somebody like, Olga or a younger version of Tar, you're thinking like, how do I fit in this world? And I think one of the character differences between Olga and Tar is that Olga's she does manipulate Tar a little bit, to her credit, but like
it's funny seeing that dynamic flown in reverse.
Yeah. But Olga, I think, is still like closer to being like on the spectrum, like somebody who still cares about the music and what it means.
Oh, by far.
And Tar has already, like you said, lost all that by until like maybe the end, where she starts rediscovering that. But what, like you said, where they're similar is that like to break into this world, you do need some breaks, and you do need to be a little bit more. I hate to say the word, but like mischievous, because unless you're coming down the route of like you were just spoon fed your whole life, you're not going to have those doors open for you, because they're just going to prioritize the other rich person that was able to get the right education and the right pedigree. Right. It's a pedigree driven industry. and I think they do a good job on touching upon that, and I think that's why Tar changes her own like identity because she wants to fit in this world.
Yeah. She wants to act like she's a part of it.
Yeah, but she's not. So,
But then at the same, like in
Yeah.
doing so, she totally forgets like how she grew up.
yeah, and we're guilty of this as a society because look, I went to a vineyard and I was criticized that I didn't know anything, but I was like, I don't know anything. Like this is not my thing, like, I'm like, I'm the guy that.
Whoa. But to chill, dude, you don't like. You're just you. You didn't make any effort.
Hey, this is my podcast.
Bro,
dude.
you showed up.
I gotta create my own mythology, dude.
Hold on, you showed up. I saw the photo. You showed up in sweats, Twin Vineyard. That was crazy. That was wild.
Well, I didn't know you couldn't do that. No
and beyond that, bro, you just hold on. You decided to go to a vineyard, so that's on you.
I didn't know anything. I thought you could go with anything. It's warm, dude. Come on.
Right. You're so fascinating. Flying global entry just to go to a vineyard and wear sweats is the craziest thing I've ever heard.
It's called moving up and then not forgetting your roots.
That's just being a bum, bro. That's not even forgetting your roots. You could have worn jeans.
Too warm to wear jeans, dude. But anyways, my point is still valid. I'm just saying, like,
I got you.
You
I know. I understand your point. It's like even like, we talked about this earlier. People are like, there's this whole idea that you're not a success unless you go to college, right? I mean, that's the way our society sort of structured and painted this in the cultural background, right? And if you're like a plumber, or an electrician, you're just viewed as a different light, even though that's to me personally, that's completely asinine. But
actually, one thing I'll say about this topic on the class is that I remember one time I was I want to say criticized. I'll just say somebody shared their opinion that I shouldn't wear a hoodie to Carnegie Hall, and all I said back was, "There's no official dress code, and that stuff has changed." They didn't like that answer, but hey, I still got into watch. So yeah, because I mean these pompous people, like this is the one
who is it that also told you, oh, I forgot you grew up poor, which is the craziest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, that was another guy I knew in New York, because I tend to not like to waste food. And so I usually,
by the way, the craziest thing I think I've ever heard anyone say that.
Well, this character,
crazy.
I haven't talked to him in a long time, but the reason I loved hanging out with him is that he had some really hot takes and probably problematic takes, dude. But yeah, I remember that. I remember actually because the other two guys are four of my friends, the brothers. I remember, I don't want to say their names, but like I remember them looking across me like, dude, I can't believe he just said that, dude. It's like, yeah, dude, no, because it's true. Like a lot of people that I meet now, because of for better or worse, now I'm in social circles that are just different than the ones well, actually not that different. Where I went to high school, also pretty affluent people. So I take that back. But I'm still like the core same person. So like but yeah, it's very interesting how like people have these perceptions and I think going back to the film, I think unfortunately many people are not like me, right? They're gonna try to conform to that stuff, even though I'm gonna be honest with you, I've always told people that's gonna be, you can probably pull it off because it's something you can probably learn and fake, but like, dude, I'm not gonna like learn which dumb spoon we eat with, dude. Like I'm not gonna learn.
There's a level of pretentiousness with that I don't care about.
But it all ties together. That's why I'll give again credit to the film, is that it's about gatekeeping. This film's topic is also gatekeeping. It's about
well, that's what I said at the beginning.
Yeah, it's fascinating how like we gatekeep things that like in the end of the day are so meaningless. Like if you enjoy certain music, it doesn't matter if you go with the hoodie or a polo, like you're there to enjoy the music. You're not trying to be disruptive. You're not trying to shout or do a protest. That's when it gets, I can understand, but like, it's just that like people have this certain perception of how things should be. And this goes to anything, right? Like, oh, who you should marry, who you should interact with in society. And, when you build these walls, that's when you create problems, in my opinion. But anyway, that's my end of my soapbox. I do want to talk about the ending where she ends up in Thailand.
Well, no, the Philippines.
Or Philippines, sorry. Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead. I'll let you break that down.
I mean, it's not much of a breakdown. It's just this quick summary is that like it was fascinating to see how like she goes somewhere else where she's not as well known, or her, let's say her baggage isn't as like people who are into probably the music like stuff like know who she is because they end up like receiving her very well. This orchestra group in the Philippines. But like obviously the media isn't going to be like covering her like, oh, how she have a job and stuff, right? But the scene with the when she goes to the massage place, I'm curious what you thought about that one, and where she was just like trying to get a massage for her back, and then she realized that she was in a brothel, and then she throws
pukes.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't quite know where that one was going. That kind of, I didn't know what to think.
So I have my own take. It could be wrong, but
Yeah, I'll let
my
you go with
take,
it.
my take is that it would if you rephrase it, like if you recontextualize it, what's the difference between what she didn't want to do it intentionally, but what let's say if it was intentional, what's the difference between what she's doing there, where it's very transactional, she's picking a young woman out of a lineup that she fancies and paying for,
Mhm.
where the currency is money and the power dynamic is she's in control and the young,
Mhm.
unfortunately innocent girl isn't, and what she was doing with young musicians, where the power was music and her gatekeeping. That was her currency, but she was
Oh
still.
yeah,
That was, I think, their take. Is that like when you do it in that world? Oh yeah, it's a gray area, but like it's in reality, if you break it down, it's this.
it's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That was my take. Yeah.
Basically, you're saying it's like prostitution adjacent.
Yeah. And she
Yeah.
throws up,
Okay. Yeah, I can see
but
it.
she's a hypocrite
When
because
she
she throws up.
realized that. Yeah.
She throws up because it's like, oh, it's prostitution, but she in many ways is doing something that's very, like I said, adjacent.
Similar.
Just change the currency basically.
Yeah. Okay.
And so
Yeah, I get that.
that was my take, and I was just like, oh, that's good. So I was like, that's
That's pretty good.
credit for the film. Yeah. Anyways, that was
What about? Did you like the ending where she ends up composing for at a cosplay?
yeah, basically at a cosplay event, right? Yeah.
I couldn't help but laugh.
That was that's when you know you're no longer prestigious as you once were. Yeah.
No.
But it looks like she was taking it with super very seriously. So like I think she's done what I always love citing this line because you know it's one of my favorite books and one of my favorite Candide is one of my favorite books. Is that, you know, at the end of the book he says like you have to cultivate your garden. At the end of the day, you can be involved in all the power structures, all your own drama, but in the end, you need to find something to focus on so you can just live your life. And I think she reached that point where this is it. And it is sad in some ways because it's like you had such heights and now you're such lows.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, it's a tragedy. But where else is she only knows one thing, right? She has to go back to the one thing that she knows well. And
she wasn't going to stay in Staten Island.
Yeah. And she wasn't going to become suddenly like you know, well, I don't even know they have this. Like, I guess you do have this, like a reviewer. Like, you could be a writer for a magazine and review. But
that's not what she loves.
No, exactly. So like, she had to go back to that, right? So, anyway. But yeah, it was funny. Like, I was just like, where is this going? And then she puts the headset on so she can hear the music, and then the cosplayers are like, "Oh, we're going on this journey." I was just, oh my goodness, dude, this is so sad for you. Like these other people don't even care who you are. They just want to hear good music.
Yeah, well, they just want to hear like it's like when people go hear Hans Zimmer wanting to hear you know, the Batman soundtrack.
Yeah, but look, going back to my point about like how she was so focused on control of the music and audience, there she has no control with the audience. Like the audience gets what they want. Like the audience is in control. She isn't anymore. So in the end, she's a truly, even though she's doing, you know, as close as she can to what she loves,
the dynamic's different.
She's lost all the things that she thought was important, you know, like in sense of like not just her family and stuff, but like her sense of control over the music, which is, I think, was what her prowess was. So I was just like, oh, in that sense, it was proper. Anyway.
It was good. I thought the ending was very good. Anyway, I'll let you. Why don't you go ahead and give your final ratings?
Yeah, so I will say that this film is sophisticated. You know, it has a lot of good, you know, motifs and techniques in it, which I always like. I think most importantly, I think one of the things I appreciate most about this film is how it can deconstruct a character who seems all powerful, but then they realize that it's the power is a facade.
They peel back the layers.
And also, I think leaves you with some big questions, like if she was never caught, would the power structure keep perpetuating? So in the end, you're left with like, because you think like, oh, she's getting, canceled, and because I could see how you could feel righteous if you're a more of a liberal writer, but I question that feeling because I just wonder if like, oh, if they don't get
and
caught.
you act like that will never happen again in a different setting.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't buy it.
And so in that regard, I will say that like,
I think what a lot of those same analysts or people that fail to realize is people are people, right? It's not like you're going to change human behavior just like that overnight, unfortunately.
I will say that like the movie, I'm not the right person to say this because I like Stalker, and that you can't find a slower film than that one.
Yeah, come on, man.
But this film, I will admit, on an objective level, it is the pace at times is a bit slow because I did recognize that like towards the end, I was like,
I will remind you, Burning was, and I rewatched this recently. Burning was very slow.
Yeah, but I didn't mind it. I like that. I like that aspect. Sometimes that slow burn. But I when I tend to think of a movie like, oh, is it wrapping up? Like that's always not like a yellow flag for me, because I think they made their point kind of many times, but they had to repeat it just a few times. Especially with like her downfall, with, like all the allegations. I was like, okay, we know that she's in trouble. You don't have to show us another scene where she's meeting with people about like, you heard about these allegations, or you have a lawyer, right? It's like we could have done that maybe once or twice. Yeah. And then just at a high level, I enjoyed the musical score. I will say, I think cinematography, like your point, was a strong point. Obviously, Cate Blanchett had a great performance. I think the other performances were good, but obviously
they weren't great.
It's her movie. This is Cate Blanchett's movie.
I think he was trying to showcase her, obviously.
Yeah, so that makes sense. But yeah, my final rating for this film is 8.5 out of 10. I really liked it. I would recommend it to many people. I think some of the scenes left me wanting a little bit more. Like I said, the Juilliard scene I think could have gone even further. I think there's some other scenes.
What do you wish they delved into?
I wish the young student wasn't such a straw man. I wish he had a little bit better arguments, and that would have been a fascinating debate. Because I get it, they were trying to show that she has all the power in the beginning, and then she doesn't have any.
So I think that was the point of it.
But I'm greedy. I would have loved just a little more back and forth, because I think it was just too easy. Because again,
yeah, I see what you're saying.
Because like, I've been bashing on the liberal side, but on the right wing stuff, I saw, oh, don't worry, they love that. So they're like, oh yeah, see, these people are woke, they're fake. It's all fake arguments, and I was like, well, yeah, but it's straw man-ish.
Yeah, it was a straw man for sure.
The strength and the weakness of this film.
Hold on, but Chris, have I seen people who live up to that straw man? Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. But I think
you have too.
That's the strength and the weakness of this film, is that it's very interpretive, and like people can see what they want to see. And I think that really works for like when you have people who want to see like both sides, even if it's ugly.
I agree, but which I think we gave some context to that a little bit more. But I think you wish the film had done the same.
Exactly. So yeah. But yeah,
that's a fair critique.
Yeah, I'll let you take it away. But yeah, that's kind of like my sense.
I think we had similar thoughts on this movie. I thought initially the film felt a bit slow. They never really introduced the characters. Like for a while, I was a little confused as to the context of like Lydia and her wife. I was like, is that her wife, girlfriend, like family member? Like they never really say, and like it takes you a little while to pick up. Oh yeah, they're like married. They have an adopted daughter. And so I was like, it was kind of a little all over the place and slow at the beginning. And then I would say post the Juilliard scene, it really like kind of starts to pick up. And it was like, it kept me pretty engaged at that point. Cinematography was great. I get your point with wanting a little bit more depth on that Juilliard scene too. That being said, I thought how that scene was shot was really cool, because it like followed her. It showed she was in total command the entire time, and I think that was the point they were trying to get across.
Actually, speaking of that scene, I did laugh when they did they show us the Instagram or the TikTok edit and how bad it was edited. But it was like basically made her
Wait,
look like.
what happened?
Remember when that she sees the video of like the thing that got leaked of like the editing that where she was basically like out of context, but the editing was so bad it was off, and I still laughed because I was like, I was so funny.
But that happens a lot, and I think that's also what they were trying to point to. Is a lot of times things get real. Dude, you have no idea how many times I've talked to her. Like someone saw the clip, I was like, "Well, did you see what was like 45 minutes to or seconds to a minute before and after?" No, and like that can make or break the context like to such a degree, like give it a totally different perspective.
I know, that's why I enjoy like sharing things out of context all the time.
Yeah, the little snippets sound like 5 seconds sound abhorrent, and then you listen like a minute beforehand. It's like, oh, that was so different from what that little clip was said. So many times people get taken out of context in that way.
I love it, but go ahead.
But anyway, well, yeah, that's because you like chaos, like an agent of chaos. But anyway, I did really appreciate how that scene was shot. It kind of followed her moving throughout the rows in the auditorium, and just showed her totally in command. While even like the height difference of her being like 8 rows up and then looking down at the kid, I think that was all intentional.
It was,
right? Yeah. So I really liked how that was kind of like one shot, and I was like, wow, this is a really long scene. And then I kept thinking, I was like, is this done in one shot? I was like, then I like thought about it more. I was like, this is like pages of dialogue she's like memorizing for this. That was really impressive, and how she delivered that entire monologue and the cadence with which she delivered it. But yeah, aside from that, cinematography, like I said, was great. We already pointed to that. And I thought this film did have like a lot of depth. There's a lot of layers. I mean, this is one of our longest pod episodes we've done, obviously, because there was quite a bit to discuss or that we could go into with this, unlike some of the other films that we've reviewed. Yeah, for that, I have to give it a 9 out of 10.
Nice.
Yeah, anyway, I think that's it for this week's episode. If you enjoyed our commentary on this movie, please like and subscribe to our channel. And just leave any suggestions in the comment section for films that you think